Jason, and I want to show you how I investigate large data frames with Buckaroo. This is going to walk through a real life situation where my cousin called up and wanted help with a data frame. And he's like, well, he called it an Excel CSV file. And he's like, this is bigger than Excel can open, so I probably need Buckaroo. He meant pandas, but. So he runs a business where he markets to doctors. And he found a data set with all doctors registered in the US from the government. Uh, and he wanted to see, he was looking for anesthesiologists in particular. And he wanted to see this data. This is something that comes up very frequently in data analysis workflows. You have this new data set. Is it useful to you? And how do you get a sense of it? So I'm going to walk you through like some techniques that I used. So this was a 1 gigabyte zip file. Unzipped, it was 10 gigabytes, about 9 million rows with 330 columns. It's large. So here is what I do, and kind of here are some of the ways I use Buckaroo. Import Buckaroo and pandas, read in the file, and we read the first 50,000 rows. That's enough to give us a sense of it, and if you read the whole file, you're going to have memory problems, you're going to run out of memory, things are going to be really slow. We just want to get a feel for the data. So here we've loaded the data, and now we can just look at the columns and look at the data. This is what Buckaroo is built for. So we have these categorical histograms, and so provider first line of business. So this is telling us that this address accounts for 1% of the data. Long tail or an object will occur twice, at least twice. So that's 39% of the observations are long tail. 51% are unique. 9% are null. And it's kind of how I read these. So you can just look through this, and we have a lot of stuff here. Scroll down a little bit. Buckaroo said we filtered to 250 columns. There were 330 columns. This is one of the widest data frames I've seen in the wild, and that is a choice that Buckaroo makes. At some point, you do have to cut things off because although Buckaroo is very fast, you will run into problems. So we see a lot of these columns where it's 94% NA, 99%, 99%. And I don't really know this data set. This is stuff my cousin would know, but I'm just trying to get a sense of it. Like, why do we have these columns? And we can just switch. Yeah, take a look at this. Okay. If you want to look at the last 100 columns, you can just July DF, the subcolumns, negative 100. This gives us those 100 columns, and there are even more nulls here. We have a lot of null columns here. So we can do some filtering. So I wrote this simple function where if a column is all null, you just drop that column. And here we went from 330 to 300 columns. That helps. And these are columns that are all null for the first 50,000 rows. They might have values later on, but we're just getting a sense of the data. And then I was wondering about these columns that are mostly null, and I wanted to just get a sense of this. So I wrote this function called NA outliers only. This iterates through the columns. If a column is 99% null or greater, puts that into mostly NA columns. And then we filter through the columns, and we just grab the extant rows for each one of those columns and union them. And we add this to Buckaroo with add processing. So we have to instantiate a Buckaroo widget, passing in the data frame, which we've already dropped the null columns from, all null columns. Add processing, and we have NA outliers only. And that is turned on here. So turn this function on, and we go from 50,000 total rows down to about 1100 filtered rows. So now we can come over and look at these, some of these mostly NA columns, and they're going to look very different now. So we have 37% unique, and you just sort it. I mean, we could have done this above, but you just sort this and you see, okay, well, a lot of these rows are not null together, which is interesting. The reason I built post-processing functions into Buckaroo is in real-world data analysis workflows, I'll have notebooks where I will write little functions or transforms. Hopefully I'll write it as a function. Sometimes I just write it in line. And I will, make that modification to a data frame. But I'm just doing it to look at the data frame. I'm not doing it to, like, this is not part of my data analysis pipeline. So you don't need to take up a whole separate cell, and you want to be able to have like your own little library of these functions, these little utility functions that you use to get a different view of the data. And the fact that you can just turn them on and turn them off in Buckaroo, like if we started with this, we don't need to take up separate cells. In this notebook we have, because we did a little bit of development on the function, that's a very useful thing. And you're probably just going to throw this away, but that's fine. Like, this gives you this view now, and then you can reuse the function in later notebooks. So, talking to my cousin, he's like, here is the code for anesthesiologists. I think it was H367. No, that was not it. It was, we can just say it was 367. Down to 1200 rows. That's going to, so we search the data frame for 367, and that's going to be 367 occurring in any string column. And at this point, we've instantiated Buckaroo. We have a reference to it, and that's so that in the next cell, you can say bw2.dataflow.processDataFrame.toCSV. And then read lines. So I wrote this out to a CSV, and then we can just display it here. And by displaying it, like, I was able to save the CSV and send it over to my cousin. End result being that this data wasn't useful to him. And that happens all the time in data analysis. Like, you don't always like look at a data set and get an amazing blog post out of it. Most of the time you're going to look at a data set and it's not useful at all. But you want to be able to figure that out quickly, iterate it through it quickly, and here are just some basic techniques for doing that. There will be an accompanying Medium blog post about this, and yeah, and then part 2, I go through techniques to use if you do want to analyze the entire data set, and that's going to use polars a lot, a little bit of Buckaroo, but more. Here are techniques you can use to do that with polars.